Hey everybody, book club time. This is Foundations by Dr. Childress. This is a phenomenal book, although this is geared specifically for co-parenting with a cluster B individual. The descriptions are very, very valuable, and I want to read just a couple of things from here. And I'll put the page numbers in here, page 41. Talks about borderline. So remember, if you're dealing with a narcissist, you're also dealing with a borderline to a certain degree, because it all gets the borderline is the key to everything. Okay, so in order to understand a narcissist, you have to understand borderlines. So the borderline personality has no internal structural defense against the continual experience of inadequacy and a fear of abandonment. The borderline personality structure is therefore continually seeking an external regulatory other who will provide support to their fragile personality organization. The borderline person seeks a perfect idealized love from their attachment figure in order to fill the void of their self-inadequacy that's at the core of their personality. So to quiet the abandonment fears, the attachment figure must provide the borderline with the perfectly attuned, constant availability that creates the idealized, perfect security of never being abandoned by this person. And so central is this stabilizing role for stability that any empathic failure by the relationship partner in their role as the regulatory will result in the complete collapse of the borderline into chaotic rages and intensely experienced fears of abandonment. The fragile borderline personality structure needs the attachment figure to be completely dedicated to their role as the regulatory other in order to keep them stable, in much the same way as a parent is totally dedicated to regulating the psychological state of an infant. When the other person in the relationship does not meet the needs of the borderline personality, then the borderline personality will lash out in an infantile rage against the failures of the regulatory other. They will accuse their partners of providing insufficient love and devotion and in failing to be a completely devoted person. The underlying disorganized attachment of the borderline personality means that this person has developed no organized approach to restoring relationships once they are ruptured. The borderline person therefore needs to remain in a constant state of psychological fusion with the other person in order to prevent unrepairable breaches to the relationship. Any breach in the relationship triggers a complete collapse of their personality structure into chaotic and disorganized responses from the disorganized patterns of attachment. Okay, now for the narcissist. So instead of seeking the perfect love that the borderline seeks, a narcissist seeks a perfectly adoring other who maintains the narcissistic defense by providing continuing adoration. Okay, so they seek to be constantly adored, right? Not perfect love, right? So once the other person ceases to provide adequate narcissistic supply, then this person is discarded. For the narcissistic personality, the other person has no intrinsic value other than the supply they provide. This represents a narcissistic style defense against the experience of self-inadequacy and the fears of rejection. So by devaluing the importance of the attachment figure, the narcissistic personality creates a psychological defense of self-inflation by comparison to this other person. Then the narcissist rejects the attachment figure for their inadequacy before that person can reject them. The narcissistic defense psychologically expels the experience of self-inadequacy by projecting it onto others. The core belief of the narcissistic personality is that the other person is inadequate, while the narcissist remains ideal and perfect. This projection of inadequacy onto others to maintain the self-image results in the externalization of blame and responsibility characteristics of the narcissistic personality. It is the other person who is a failure. And it's the other person who is inadequate, not the narcissist. The fears of rejection and abandonment are avoided by minimizing the importance of others to the narcissistic personality. For the narcissist, relationships are shallow and superficial, and then people are easily discarded. Now let me just sort of comb through this. All right. And now we'll come here to page 98. Okay, because I want to talk about this cognitive dysregulation. Okay, so the profound dysregulation of a narcissist or borderline is across all levels of psychological functionings. So we're talking about like when they get upset through an emotional injury or they get triggered or anything like that. It's called cognitive dysregulation. Okay, those are some big words there, but just listen to this because you're gonna hear you're gonna hear your history in this. Okay. So the profound dysregulation of the borderline or narcissistic personality is across all levels of psychological functioning, including the dysregulation of the organized cognitive functioning necessary for an accurate perception of reality. The self-structure of the narcissistic borderline personality is at a near infantile level of development. So when the fragile regulations of their personality organization is lost, the collapse into psychological disorganization is nearly complete, including the cognitive structures needed to interpret reality. Okay? So, let me say that again. When the fragile regulation of the narcissistic personality is lost, the collapse into psychological disorganization is nearly complete, including the cognitive structures needed to interpret reality. Now, this has a lot to do with gaslighting and word salad and how they just go, right? Cognitive dysregulation, people. Okay? So, when the psychological structures of the narcissistic or borderline collapse into chaotic disorganization, the thought processes become equally disorganized and dysregulated. If the narcissist needs to distort truth or reality in an effort to regain an organized and regulated state, then truth and reality are readily sacrificed. The limiting constraints imposed by truth and reality become secondary considerations as the self-structure organization of the personality collapses into chaotic disorganization. In this chaotically swirling emotional experience of the narcissistic personality's collapse, truth and reality become fluid and subjectively defined constructs capable of being bent, distorted, and fabricated to meet the emotional and psychological needs of the moment. So for the narcissistic personality, maintaining or regulating an organized and regulated psychological state takes precedent over all other considerations, including the restrictions imposed by truth and reality. If truth and reality need to be altered or distorted in order for the narcissistic personality to maintain or regain an organized and regulated state, then truth and reality become redefined to meet the needs of the narcissistic personality. The label borderline was placed on this personality style because it was believed that the underlying organization of these personalities was on the borderline between neurotic and psychotic. Now, let me see if there's... And this whole book is just, man, such treasure, we will call it. There is another section that I want to find. See, a lot of this has to do with parenting. So, and I guess Well, let's see here. Let me just show you guys the table of contents here, right? Well, let's see. Well, no, the table of contents isn't really going to tell you much. It doesn't go down into any of the lower levels. Okay. I'll tell you what the book as a whole, it goes into co-parenting with narcissists, things of what was previously called parental alienation syndrome, which is not a thing. But it is described by conventional psychology as family systems, and that's what this is. It's an attachment model, an attachment-based model of parental alienation using family systems psychology, and it is wonderful, especially if you are if you have kids with one. Here's a good section on metabolizing sadness, and I'll leave y'all with this. Okay, the narcissistic personality is characterologically unable to process the emotions of sadness and grief. The narcissists are especially deficient in genuine feelings of sadness and mournful longing. Their incapacity for feeling depressive reactions is a basic feature of their personalities. When abandoned or disappointed by other people, they may show what on the surface looks like depression, but which on further examination emerges as anger and resentment loaded with revengeful wishes, rather than real sadness for the loss of a person who they appreciated. The loss of the intact family structure will be grieved by all family members, even if the marriage was conflicted and unsustainable. The loss of attachment-mediated relationships will invariably produce feelings of grief and sadness. The narcissistic personality, however, is characterologically incapable of processing the emotions of grief and sadness, and instead converts the experience of sadness into anger and resentment, loaded with resentful wishes. So this is why if you've ever been through a bad breakup with a narcissist or a divorce with one, how it was just, you're upset, you're sad, you're trying to process all of the sadness and grief, and they're just straight up carnivorous and just terrible. And it is because they are incapable of metabolizing sadness. As a result, it metabolizes as anger, right? And so that was a big epiphany for me. Okay, I said that would be the last section, but anyways, this is Foundations. It is by C.A. Childress, Craig Childress. He also has a YouTube channel. It's a small channel, but has a gold mine of information on it. You'll also find him testifying in Pennsylvania to a, I think it's a state Senate hearing, something like that, but he's some sort of hearing where he's testifying about the effects of narcissistic parenting on a split home dynamic, and it is phenomenal. So look him up, check him out. I'm out. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, comment, or share. I'll see y'all on the next video.